Good evening, this is Professor Raft. Tonight, we are going to be doing Chapter 11 in our Business Ethics course, Managing Environmental Issues. We will go to Slide 2 for the key learning objectives. Knowing the main features of environmental laws in the U.S. and other nations, understanding the advantages and disadvantages of different regulatory approaches, assessing the costs and benefits of environmental regulation, defining an ecologically sustainable organization and the stages through which firms progress as they become more sustainable, understanding how businesses can best manage environmental issues, analyzing how effective environmental management makes firms more competitive. We move on to Slide 3. The role of government. In many nations, government regulates business activity in order to protect the environment. By setting common standards, governments can take cost of pollution control out of competition. Governments can also provide economic incentives and offer assistance for resolving disputes. Pollution is a serious problem. We have holes in the ozone layer because of harmful chemicals that we produced. If you go to countries like China, China is notorious for its pollution and its smog. Several years ago, I was looking at an old edition of National Geographic, and they were showing two children in some Romanian village. Literally half their face was white. The lower half of their face was white, and this part was a soot black because of all the pollutants in the air. And children, I read the article, children had various lung diseases, there was cancer, birth defects, all kinds of horrible things. And of course, this is post-Berlin Wall collapse and post-Ceausescu, but still, the old regime was still somewhat in power, and the old systems were somewhat in power. So pollution is a very serious thing and meant to be taken seriously. As an avid fisherman, I myself am very sensitive to pollution. In the book that they give you when you get your fishing license, it talks about how many fish you can eat out of the East River. Now, why is there a limit as to how many fish one can eat out of the East River? I should be able to eat as many fish as I prefer to eat. But that's not the case. The case is because there's high levels of pollutants such as mercury, and mercury does tremendous brain damage. So the government always tries to protect us against issues. We move on now. By setting common standards, governments can take cost of pollution control out of competition. Governments can also provide economic incentives and offer assistance for resolving disputes. Major areas of environmental regulation: the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, main agency charged with pollution control, was established in 1970. In the U.S., the federal government regulates in three major areas of protection: the air, the water, and land. We move on to slide number 5. Slide 5, you can read it. It talks about various leading environmental protection laws, starting in 1969 for the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act of 70, the Water Pollution Control Act of 72, and there's an entire myriad going all the way up to the last one on this chart from 1999, the Chemical Safety Information, Site Security, and Fuels Regulatory Relief Act, which sets standards for the storage of flammable chemicals and fuels. We move on to 6. Major areas of environmental regulation. Air pollution occurs when more pollutants are emitted into the atmosphere that can safely be absorbed and diluted by natural process. The special problem of air pollution is acid rain, which destroys crops. The efforts of the U.S. government to reduce acid rain illustrates some of the difficult trade-offs involved in the environmental policy. Water pollution occurs when more wastes are dumped into waterways than can be naturally diluted and carried away, which results in the death of fish. Land pollution, slide 7, the contamination of land by both solid and hazardous waste, movement for environmental justice, efforts to prevent inequitable exposure to hazardous risks in disadvantaged communities. Superfund, or CERCLA legislation passed in 1980, established funds to clean up the most dangerous toxic waste sites in the U.S. Of 1,200 sites put on the national priority list by 2008, only 332 of them had been fully cleaned up. As many as 10,000 other sites might need cleanup. The program is regarded as public policy failure. Unfortunately, meant well, but they did not succeed in their endeavors. Slide 8, alternate policy approaches, environmental standards. Standard allowable levels of various pollutants are established by legislation or regulatory action, also called command and control. Can be environmental quality standards or emission standards. Market-based mechanisms based on the idea that the market is a better control than extensive standards that specify precisely what companies must do. Tradable permits allows businesses to buy and sell the right to pollute, a process known as cap and trade, which is ridiculous. Emissions charges or fees and government incentives. So if you want to pollute, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It sounds a little bit out of whack. It doesn't make any sense, but I guess it's like taxing people on cigarettes in the hope that they will stop smoking. Slide number 9, alternative policy approaches, information disclosure. The government encourages companies to pollute less by publishing information about the amount of pollutants individual companies emit each year, also called regulation by publicity or regulation by embarrassment. Civil and criminal enforcement, the threat of fines. European regulators have actively pursued environmental criminals, and U.S. Sentencing Commission has established guidelines for sentencing environmental wrongdoers. The next slide, figure 11.2, talks about advantages or disadvantages of alternate policy approaches to reducing pollution. We will take a short break.